Cop captures person of color. However, after 7 minutes he's jobless. In the present video we uncover a stunning tale about a person of color captured by a cop under problematic conditions, which began as a apparently typical experience heightened quickly, leaving the local area shocked. The whole occurrence unfurled in only 7 minutes, leaving spectators in dismay. Assuming this story intrigues you, let us know as to whether you partook in the video. Press 1 if not, press 0. Your criticism assists me with bringing you really motivating and significant stories. It was a bright evening in Atlanta and FBI specialist Aaliyah Parker, a splendid and regarded individual of color, was driving back to her office. Subsequent to finishing a tiring examination, she had gone through months dealing with a high-profile case following a hazardous medication cartel and was near a major forward leap regardless of the pressure and depletion of the gig. Aaliyah felt pleased with her work, being one of a handful of the dark ladies in a dominatingly white male-overwhelmed office was difficult, yet Aaliyah had procured her place. As she passed through the city, her brain was occupied with exploring subtleties of the case. Abruptly, blue and red lights streaked in her rear view reflect. Astounded, she looked at her speedometer. She wasn't speeding. Confounded, she pulled to the roadside, uncertain of what she'd fouled up. Behind her a police cruiser halted and a tall white official got out, his demeanor harsh, his hand laid on his holstered weapon. As he strolled toward her window, Aaliyah brought down her window and gone after her FBI identification, getting ready to make sense of. Good evening, official. Is there an issue? She asked smoothly. The official, who informal ID read Ethan, didn't recognize her. Hello, permit and enlistment, he said. CTLY. Aaliyah, surprised by his unforgiving tone, remained proficient. I'm a FBI specialist. Here's my identification, she said, holding it out for him to see. Ethan gave it a short look prior to scowling. I said permit and enrollment, he snapped, disregarding her completely. Aaliyah's chest fixed. Something felt off. She'd experienced intense officials before, however this one was various. His demeanor toward her position as a government specialist disrupted her. Official, I'm on official obligation, she said solidly, attempting to defuse the circumstance. Ethan didn't move. Get out of the vehicle, he requested out of nowhere. Aaliyah froze, dazed by his request. Excuse me, she asked, stunned. Are you hard of hearing? I expressed. Get out of the vehicle, Ethan yelled, his voice clearly to the point of drawing consideration from neighboring people on foot. Aaliyah wavered, her heart beating. She knew her privileges and this wasn't not too far off. Was no great explanation for her to be pulled over, substantially less arranged out of her vehicle. At this point here she was trapped in a circumstance spiraling crazy. The circumstance was spiraling wild, quicker than Arya might have expected. She had been prepared to oversee high-tension situations, however this one felt perilously unique. The heaviness of the pressure was choking. Furthermore, the racial hints in Ethan's conduct were unquestionable. Official, I'm following your solicitation, however you want to comprehend. I'm a FBI specialist, she rehashed, her tone quiet however firm, attempting to diffuse the raising circumstance. Ethan's articulation turned with scorn as he inclined nearer to her vehicle window. I couldn't care less on the off chance that you're the president. Get out of the vehicle or I'll drag you out myself, he spat. Aaliyah's stomach tied as she faltered, her hands intentionally noticeable. Gradually she opened the vehicle entryway, also ventured out around her. Passers-by started to pay heed, murmuring and observing, yet none thought for even a second to intercede before she could say another word. Ethan raged toward her, generally gotten her arm and pushed her against the vehicle. Hello, what are you doing? She snapped, her voice bound with mistrust and outrage. Opposing capture, Ethan jeered, curving her arm despite her good faith with superfluous power. You think blazing your identification makes you distant, don't you? Aaliyah flinched as the cuffs bit into her wrists. She was unable to make sense of what was occurring. It was embarrassing, infuriating, and an appalling maltreatment of power. Here she was a government specialist with power over critical cases, treated Like a typical criminal, since this official wouldn't perceive her job or more regrettable due to who she was. The group's consideration had grown. A few groups straightforwardly recorded the experience on their telephones. Aaliyah's cheeks ignited with a combination of fury and humiliation, yet she held her head high. She wasn't about to allow this extremist official to break her resolve. Official Ethan, you're committing an error, she said, her voice consistent. Notwithstanding the quake of outrage underneath it. Shut your mouth, Ethan yelped, toxin dribbling from each word. You believe you're superior to every other person since you're FBI. Well, think about what you're not. Exempt from the rules that everyone else follows. Aaliyah's brain hustled. She expected to keep even-tempered and concentrate, yet she likewise needed to think quick. Her partners could never accept this. Kept and embarrassed during a routine stop, Ethan hauled her toward the watch vehicle overlooking her endeavors to reason with him as he constrained her into the secondary lounge. She got the steps of the spectators. A few obviously frightened telephones were pointed at her recording the treachery, yet nobody ventured forward to stop it. As the entryway closed, Aaliyah breathed in profoundly, constraining herself to concentrate. She had confronted endless difficulties in her profession, yet this was different. This was private. Ethan had crossed a line and she was unable to allow it to slide. Her psyche moved into overdrive as the watch vehicle pulled away. Reinforcement. A formal objection. She was unable to blow her top now, however. She additionally couldn't let this stand. One thing was sure, this wasn't the end by no stretch of the imagination. Aaliyah sat toward the rear of the watch vehicle, the virus steel of the cuffs diving into her wrists, each shock of the ride making them chomp harder. Through the window the cityscape obscured, yet her contemplations dashed quicker than the passing roads. This wasn't simply one more routine capture, there was an evil edge to it, a feeling that official Ethan wasn't simply taking care of his business. He had made this individual. Was it since she was a person of color, or was he simply the sort of cop who considered position to be a weapon, not an obligation? One way or the other, it didn't change her world now. The main thing that made a difference was sorting out her next move. Aaliyah battled to consistent her breathing, directing each ounce of preparing she needed to keep even-tempered under pressure. Losing her cool wouldn't help. Her originally believed was to call her boss, yet her hands were stuck the bone all the way too far, requesting that Ethan relax the sleeves. Entered her thoughts, however. The self-satisfied articulation he'd worn before told her it was an exercise in futility. From the rear view reflect, his eyes locked onto hers, a sneer twisting his lips. You truly thought you'd move away with acting like FBI, didn't you? His voice trickled with loftiness, each word intended to incite her. Aaliyah's glare was sufficiently sharp to cut. I'm not presenting. I'm a FBI specialist and you're committing a monstrous error. Ethan laughed, shaking his head as though she just made the world's most crazy quip. Sure you are, and I'm the head of police. His tone ignited with joke. However, Aaliyah wouldn't take the snare, allowing her displeasure to erupt, would as it were give him more power. She kept quiet even as her blood bubbled underneath the surface. The vehicle eased back, maneuvering into the LCK of a new police headquarters. It wasn't the clamoring region, she realized. It was a more established, nearly neglected building on the edges of town. Aaliyah's stomach hitched as acknowledgement set in. Ethan had intentionally brought her here, distant from intrusive eyes and her partners. This wasn't about method, it was about control. He ventured out and yanked the entryway open, snatching her arm with pointless power. Let go, specialist, he jeered, spitting the word like a joke. Aaliyah recoiled as he pushed her forward. His grasp, swelling and disparaging inside the station, was nearly unnervingly calm. 2 or 3 officials looked into momentarily, however immediately deflected their eyes, their aloofness cooling. This wasn't simply about Ethan, this was a culture, a framework that empowered him. Nobody here would intercede. Al was totally alone, her chest fixed, yet she constrained herself to stand tall as he hauled her past the work area. He tossed her into a faintly lit cross-examination room, the entryway banging behind them, repeating like a gunfire. The room was infertile, simply a metal table and 2 seats under a powerless bright light. Ethan pushed her into a seat, leaving the cuff set up. As he paced, "Let's make something intelligible," he said, his voice cold and conscious. "It doesn't really matter to me who you guarantee to be, taking everything into account. You're simply another liar attempting to pull one over on me." His words lingered, palpably weighty with scorn, yet Aliyah wouldn't recoil. She wasn't going to allow him to see her break. Aliyah fixed a rebellious glare on him, declining to withdraw. "You're abusing my freedoms. There's no avocation for holding me, and when this is over you'll think twice about it." Ethan quit pacing and inclined in front of him. "Simple creeps from hers. Is that a danger specialist?" he asked, his voice a low, threatening snarl. Aliyah held her ground, undaunted. "It's a guarantee." He gazed her down briefly, then let out an unpleasant snicker. "You, as a matter of fact, believe that identification makes you unapproachable, don't you? Like it implies something here." His words dribbled with scorn as he added, "All around. Let me educate you. You're on my turf now." The strain all around popped. However, Aliyah remained even-headed, gathering his look. "With zero trace of dread, I confronted more awful dangers than you, official Ethan. Whatever you believe you're doing yourself will not pull off it." Ethan fixed up his grin, returning "Wexy about that," he murmured, turning pointedly and leaving the room. The entryway closed, letting Aliyah be. She breathed out leisurely, steadying herself. Some way or another she needed to figure out how to reach her group. Nobody in this station could be believed, in particular Ethan. She realized he would persevere relentlessly to keep her cut off and weak. Her psyche dashed as she studied the space for choices. There must be an exit plan, something she could utilize to turn what is going on in support of herself. Her eyes arrived on a little window. Close the roof. However, it was excessively high to arrive at. The entryway obviously was locked from the outside. She actually had her identification wrapped up her coat pocket, yet with her hands bound it was pointless. Minutes ticked by, her disappointment mounting. This wasn't her component. She was accustomed to being in charge, the one driving the charge, not stuck on the opposite side of the table. The power dynamic here was unfamiliar and rankling. Some way or another she needed to recover the high ground. Abruptly the entryway squeaked open and a more youthful official stepped in. He seemed to be in his mid-30s, his apprehensive energy substantial as he gripped a record in his grasp. Not at all like Ethan, his disposition was less forceful, practically reluctant. He looked at her, then, at that point, back at the record. Prior to talking mindfully, "A specialist, Parker," he started, his voice gentler than she expected. "I'm official Tyler. I've been told to deal with you for holding, yet I simply need to say I'm sorry regarding this." Aliyah raised an eyebrow, astounded by his tone, at missing the mark on aggression she had generally expected. Perhaps, quite possibly, he could be a partner. Before she could answer, Ethan showed up in the entryway, his glare promptly focusing in on Tyler. "What are you waiting around for? Get her handled." Ethan woofed, his voice sharp and loaded up with scorn. Tyler faltered, obviously awkward, however gave a hesitant gesture. "Yes sir," he murmured. Ethan waited a second, his puncturing look moving among Aliyah and Tyler before at long last leaving the room. As the entryway shut, Aliyah stared at Tyler. Something about his disquiet struck a. Perhaps he wasn't completely energetic about anything Ethan had arranged. He may very well be the point of failure. She wanted until further notice. There was nothing left but to watch and stand by, her psyche ascertaining the following move. She had learned quite a while in the past that individuals in places like his frequently vacillated when the stakes rose, particularly under the shadow of somebody like Ethan. However, she was unable to let any opportunity sneak past. Tyler made a sound as if to speak, and awkwardly pulling a little notepad from his pocket. "I'm going to require some essential data," he said, his voice precarious. "Name, date of birth." Routine stuff. Aliyah's eyes restricted as she concentrated on him. His distress was clear. His look continued to glimmer toward the entryway, as though he anticipated that Ethan should rush in at any subsequent. "You definitely know who I'm," she answered, her voice quiet yet unflinching. "And you realize this isn't correct?" Tyler's pen drifted midair, his hand frozen, their eyes locked for a brief second, and she got a flash of responsibility in his demeanor before he covered it under a shroud of commitment. He glanced back at his scratch pad, declining to meet her look. "I don't make the standards," he murmured. Alia inclined in somewhat, her tone consistent yet firm. "Them no, however you pick whether or then again not to follow orders you know are off base." Tyler's hand shuddered the pen. As yet wavering, the room was thick with pressure as his inward battle turned out to be progressively clear. Alia perceived the signs she'd seen an adequate number of individuals grapple with their soul under tension. "I can help you," she said, her voice relaxing barely to the point of persuading him, "yet you need to help me first." Tyler looked around apprehensively and afterward back at her. He let out a profound murmur, running a hand through his hair. "This isn't the manner by which it should work," he mumbled nearly to himself. "Something feels off, however. Ethan, he's the senior official. I don't have a decision." "Alia, remove him strongly," her voice controlled yet pointed. "Ethan is manhandling his authority and you know it on the off. Potential for success that you don't have up now. You're complicit." Tyler moved precariously, her words obviously striking a line. He looked like he was going to talk when the entryway opened up with a boisterous bang. Ethan raged in front of him, a veil of wrath. "What's taking so damn lengthy?" he snapped, his glare fixed on Tyler. "She's a per, not a crossword puzzle." Tyler leaped to his feet, staggering over his words. "I was simply getting her essential data, sir." Ethan jeered, unmoved. "Enough with the administrative work, get her into holding now." Tyler gestured rapidly, stuffing his notepad into his pocket. Furthermore, motioning for Alia to follow, he kept away from her look as he pushed toward the entryway. However, Alia wasn't going to let him off that effectively. This was her shot and she won't squander it. "You're committing an error, Ethan," she said, her voice unmistakable and steadfast. "This will return to cause major problems for you, I promise it." Ethan let out an unforgiving, deriding chuckle that reverberated in the little room. "Gracious extra me in this town nobody cares a lot about your purported power," he jeered. "You think blazing that extravagant FBI identification makes you invulnerable? Reconsider." Alia didn't jump, maintaining eye contact with him without support. "Down haven't arrived to dazzle you." Ethan's eyes gleamed briefly, only for a second. A dubious shine got through his standard self-satisfied disposition. However, it vanished as fast as it came, supplanted by his brand name egotism. "Get her out of here," he woofed, waving Tyler off like smacking a fly. Tyler, noticeably shaken, ventured forward and got Alia's arm, directing her down a thin foyer. The quiet between them was thick, accused of pressure. Alia could detect his inward clash, however he said nothing. They arrived at a little claustrophobic holding cell toward the finish of the hallway. Tyler opened the entryway and signaled for her to step inside. She faltered, gathering his look. "You actually have a decision," she said delicately, her voice consistent yet extraordinary. "You don't need to proceed with this." Tyler peered down, his shoulders hanging as though her words burdened him. He mumbled something she was unable to make out, then closed the cell entryway and left without one more word. Alia sat on the cold metal seat, her breath consistent notwithstanding the walls squeezing in on her. She constrained herself to keep even-tempered. Overreacting wouldn't generally benefit her. Definitely now. Hours crept by, every moment stirring up the fire in her chest. This wasn't just about her opportunity. This was tied in with facing the maltreatment of force, the bigotry, the embarrassment, the foul play. All things considered, consumed inside her, constant and steady. Out of nowhere, the reverberation of strides got through the quiet. Alia fixed, her muscles tense. The last individual she expected showed up at her cell entryway. Tyler, his eyes shot apprehensively down the lobby as he opened the entryway. "What are you doing?" she murmured, her voice sharp with doubt. "I'm getting you out of here," he said, his face pale however steadfast. "We don't have a lot of time." Alia froze briefly, uncertain whether to accept him. Was this a stunt? Yet what decision did she have? If there was even a bit of an opportunity, she needed to take it. She gestured and followed him out of the cell, moving rapidly through the faintly lit passages. They kept To the shadows, keeping away from any areas where different officials may be. Aaliyah's heartbeat roared in her ears as they arrived at a back leave Tyler mishandled. With his keys at long last opening the entryway, the chill of the night air hit her as he held it open. Go, he asked unobtrusively, his voice thick with dread. Before Ethan understands what's going on. Aaliyah delayed, gazing at him. Was this genuine? Might she at some point trust him? Each impulse shouted at her to pursue, yet all that she had persevered through trust felt like an unfamiliar idea. She stood frozen, briefly conflicted between taking the jump and preparing for a snare. Tyler kept looking at his watch, his developments unsteady and tense. We don't have a lot time, he murmured desperately. His voice was tight, his nerves clear as his eyes dashed around like he anticipated that Ethan should stroll in at any second. Aaliyah breathed in, profound, steadying herself. Remaining here wasn't a choice, not after what Ethan had done, but rather, in the event that she ran, it would just exacerbate the situation. She was a FBI specialist, and evaporating from a police headquarters would raise warning. She was unable to manage between unwaveringness to her standards and the truth of treachery. She needed to conclude quick the framework she had committed her life to. Had betrayed her. For what reason are you doing this? She asked, her tone quiet however firm. Tyler froze, dithering, moving quickly over his face. He begun to talk, yet halted, a conflict of feelings working out in his demeanor. At last responsibility shadowed his elements as he murmured, in light of the fact that it's off base. What Ethan is doing, it's not simply unacceptable, it's unlawful. He'll confront the outcomes at last, yet assuming that you stay here, you'll be the person who pays. You must leave presently, before it's past the point of no return. Aaliyah's eyes locked on his, looking for reality in his words. There was something practically frantic in the manner he talked, as though he required her to believe him. However could she? Was he really attempting to help, or was this about saving himself? Something about the circumstance actually didn't sit right, yet she lacked opportunity and energy to sort it out. Whether or not Tyler was being straightforward remaining would possibly compound the situation. Assuming Ethan found her still here, secured and weak, there was no determining what he could do. Aaliyah realized Ethan excessively well to misjudge him, a man intoxicated on power. Furthermore, determined by his own contempt. Taking a full breath, she pursued a decision. Okay, she murmured, let go. Tyler's shoulders hang with alleviation as he immediately guided her out. The night air hit her face like a virus sprinkle, supporting and sharp and without precedent for what felt like everlastingly. She felt a weak gleam of trust. They moved quickly and quietly, keeping to the shadows as they twisted through the rear entryway behind the station. All Aaliyah's faculties was increased, her ears tuned to each weak commotion, a far-off stride, a murmur of twist. Every last bit of it set her nerves tense. She was prepared for minutes like this. However, it felt different when the risk came from those committed to safeguard the information that Ethan could show up at any second. Nor at her determination toward the finish of the alley. Tyler led her to a battered old car. His hands fumbled with the keys before he managed to unlock the passenger side. Get in, he urged, his voice low and uneasy as his eyes darted around. Aaliyah slid in, her gaze scanning the shadows for any signs of pursuit. Tyler climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key, the car's engine rumbling to life and breaking the heavy silence of the night as they drove away from the precinct. An unspoken tension filled the small space. Neither of them said a word, the weight of their escape hanging between them. Aaliyah couldn't ignore the nagging anxiety in her chest. They were out, but far from safe. Ethan wasn't the type to let something like this go. He thrived on power, and losing it would only make him more erratic. Aaliyah finally shattered the heavy silence. Where are we going? She asked, suspicion threading through her tone. Tyler kept his eyes fixed on the road, his grip on the wheel so tight his knuckles went white. Somewhere Ethan won't think to check, he said flatly. A place where you'll be safe. A gaze narrowed, doubt creeping back into her mind. Then what? I'm not vanishing into thin air, Tyler. You know that I'm not running from this. He glanced at her, his jaw rigid with Tension I know, but for now you need to stay out of sight. You need space to figure out your next step, time to gather evidence if you're still in his crosshairs when he catches on you're done. Aaliyah, he'll bury you before you can even make a move. She leaned back, letting out a sharp breath of frustration. Her mind spun with possibilities, none of them good. Running felt like surrender, but Tyler wasn't wrong either. She needed something solid, undeniable proof to blow open Ethan corruption, but where would she even begin, and how could she trust anyone in that precinct after everything that had happened? The glow of street lights smeared across the car windows as they sped through the quiet streets. Watching the city rush past, Aaliyah's mind moved even faster. Her team at the FBI was supposed to be her safety net, but Ethan had shattered that by snatching her phone back at the station. Her hands curled into fists, anger bubbling just under the surface. Problem after problem. Tyler, she barked, her voice sharp with urgency. We have to stop. I need to make a call. His eyes jumped to the rear-view mirror, his gaze darting around like he was already being followed. We're too exposed right now. If we stop, he'll be right on us. Her patience was fraying. I'm not doing this blind, Tyler. I need to reach my people. If we're going to take Ethan down, I'm not going in solo. His sigh was slow and heavy with doubt. Out there's a gas station a few miles ahead. We'll stop there, but it has to be fast. If he's tracking us, every second counts. She nodded, already calculating who to call first. It had to be someone she trusted, someone who could act fast and keep their mouth shut. A few minutes later, Tyler pulled into a dimly lit gas station at the edge of town. Parking the car near the side of the lot, Aaliyah's eyes swept over the area, her senses dialed up to full alert. Every flicker of movement, every faint sound set her nerves on edge. She stepped out, moving quickly toward the pay and mounted to the wall of the building. Tyler stayed in the car, his eyes scanning every car that passed, every shifting shadow, like he expected Ethan to show up any second. Aaliyah lifted the phone, fingers flying as she dialed a number she knew by heart. Her pulse thudded in her ears as she waited, each ring sounding louder than the last. One ring, two, then a click. Aaliyah, is that you? The familiar voice hit her like a jolt. Her grip on the phone tightened as relief surged through her. Sharp and fleeting. Time was short. Every second on the line raised the odds of being tracked. Yet it's me, she said, her voice firm but urgent. I'm in trouble and I need your help. Ethan is crooked. He had me arrested for nothing and now he's scrambling to cover it up. Aaliyah gripped the phone tighter, her pulse racing. On the other end, Agent Jackson's breath was steady but sharp. Okay, take a breath. Where are you right now? I'm outside a gas station just past the edge of town, Aaliyah said quickly. One of the officers, Tyler, help me get out, but we don't have much time. Ethan is going to figure it out, and when he does, it won't be pretty. He's dangerous, Jackson. We've got to act fast. Jackson's tone shifted, firm and focused. All right, listen to me. We're sending backup, but you need to stay out of sight until we get there. Can you trust this Tyler guy? Aaliyah glanced at Tyler. He was tapping out a nervous rhythm on the steering wheel, his eyes darting across the shadowy lot like he expected something to jump out at them. I don't know, she admitted, eyes fixed on him, but he got me out of that station, and right now that's all I've got. Jackson let out a slow sigh. Fine, I'll pull some strings and get a team on the way, but stay sharp. Ethan isn't going down easy, and if he catches on, it's going to get ugly. Aaliyah nodded like he could see her. I hear you. I'll keep moving. Just get here, Jackson. Don't leave me hanging. You know I won't, he said firmly. Stay safe, Aaliyah. The line went dead. She lowered the phone, her mind a storm of thoughts, fear and grit swirling together. They had a plan now. Backup was coming. Ethan wasn't untouchable. She hurried back to the car and slid into the passenger seat. Tyler glanced at her, brow pinched with worry. Everything good? He asked, eyes flicking from her to the rear-view mirror. For now, she muttered. Made the call. My team's on their way, but we can't stay put. Ethan will be looking for us any second. Tyler nodded, jaw tight. Without a word, he shifted the car into drive and eased them back onto the road. The night felt Heavier now, the empty street stretched ahead, quiet but tense, like something was lurking just out of sight. Aya kept her eyes on the mirrors, scanning for anything out of place. So far, nothing, but she knew that wouldn't last. The longer they drove, the thicker the silence between them grew, as if the weight of the night had finally caught up. Alia's mind wouldn't stop replaying it all, every second, from the moment Ethan slapped the cuffs on her to now. Her jaw clenched at the memory of his smug grin, the way he looked at her like he'd already won. Her stomach twisted with anger. How does someone like that get to wear a badge? She thought bitterly. She glanced over at Tyler, who hadn't said much since they pulled out of the station. He looked worn out, eyes sunken, his face pale in the glow of the dashboard. Helping her had cost him something, but she wasn't sure what: his loyalty, his safety. Either way, he'd made his choice, and for the first time tonight that gave her a flick of hope. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly, breaking the silence. Tyler exhaled, his grip on the wheel tightening. Yeah, I did. I couldn't stand by and watch him get away with it. Ethan has been dirty for years, but nobody's had the guts to call him out. He's got the whole place in his pocket. If I didn't do something, you'd be the one paying for his mess. Aaliyah watched him carefully, her eyes narrowing just a bit. Why now, she asked, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Why are you helping me? Tyler hesitated, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Because I've seen what happens to people who go up against him, he admitted. I've seen how he handles anyone who even thinks about challenging his authority. But you're not just anyone, you're an FBI agent. If he takes you down, it sends a message to everybody else. Nobody's untouchable. I couldn't let that happen. Aaliyah nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling in her chest. This wasn't just about taking her down. Ethan wanted to make an example of her. He wanted to show everyone that no one, not even a federal agent, was beyond his reach. But Aaliyah wasn't the kind to back down. Her whole career had been about standing up for what was right, and she wasn't about to let a power-hungry racist cop like Ethan take that from her. She would see it through, no matter what it took. The silence stretched between them as the city lights faded behind them, giving way to long dark stretches of road. Buildings became scarcer, the streets narrower, and the glow of street lights grew dim and distant. Tyler had steered them far from the main roads, clearly trying to avoid being followed, but Aaliyah knew it wouldn't be long before Ethan realized that they were gone. He'd have the entire precinct on their trail soon enough. After what felt like hours, Tyler turned into a small empty parking lot on the edge of a thick forest. The place was deserted except for a few scattered buildings barely visible in the distance. He killed the engine and turned to face her, his jaw tight with tension. Wait here for your team, he said in a low voice. It's out of sight. Ethan won't think to check here right away. Aaliyah scanned the area, every instinct telling her to stay sharp. The shadows seemed to shift and twist, and the heavy stillness only made it worse. It was quiet now, but she knew better than to feel safe still for the moment. This was the best option they had. She leaned back in her seat, eyes darting toward the tree line as her thoughts swirled. Ethan wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. She knew that much. They had to stay ahead of him no matter what it took. Tyler shifted beside her, his eyes darting toward the forest as if expecting something to emerge. We should stay quiet, he muttered, glancing her way. If anyone's following us, we don't want to give them a reason to close in. Aaliyah nodded in agreement. They'd made it this far, it wasn't the time to slip up. The quiet felt oppressive, the ticking of time stretching every second into an eternity. Every distant noise, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of traffic in the distance, sounded sharper, louder in the still night air. Aaliyah's thoughts drifted to what would come next. When Jackson's team showed up, it wouldn't be enough to just get away. Ethan had to be stopped, and to do that she needed more than manpower. She needed proof, hard evidence that could expose him for what he really was. Her eyes stayed on the woods, her mind already working on how to get it. The soft creak of tree branches swaying in the breeze was the only sound that broke the stillness of the night. Aaliyah's thoughts raced as she and Tyler sat in the dim, isolated parking Lot. The soft glow of the dashboard cast faint shadows on their faces, each passing second dragging on with unbearable weight. Tyler's eyes darted restlessly, flicking from the rearview mirror to the side windows, watching for the approach of any headlights. Aaliyah noticed his unease, but she couldn't blame him. They were both on the run from a man who wielded unchecked power, a man who would go to any length to protect his secret. I'm still trying to make sense of all this, Tyler muttered, breaking the tense silence. Ethan has always been a snake. But I never thought he'd go this far. Aaliyah glanced at him, her voice calm but resolute. He's more than a snake. Ethan feeds off control and fear, but his time is almost up. I'm going to make sure of it. Tyler gave a slow nod, but doubt still lingered in his eyes. I get that you want to take him down, but he's got the whole department under his thumb. Most of them are too scared to do anything. They know what happens if you cross him. Aaliyah exhaled deeply, frustration and resolve swirling inside her. She knew exactly how much fear Ethan could instill. She'd seen it up close. He acted like he owned the department, throwing his weight around without consequence. But this wasn't just about fear anymore. It was about justice. Ethan had pushed too far, and now he was coming after her to hide his tracks. She wasn't about to let him get away with it. We need solid proof, Aya said, half to herself, her gaze focused somewhere distant, something undeniable, something they can't brush off as rumors. Tyler frowned, his skepticism clear. Easy said than done. Ethan isn't sloppy. He covers his tracks, and nobody at the precinct is going to risk helping us. They're all too scared of him. Aaliyah clenched her jaw, her mind working overtime. She knew Tyler was right. Going after Ethan wouldn't be simple, especially when most of the officers either supported him or feared him too much to act. But she also knew that men like Ethan always slipped up eventually. It was just a matter of finding the one loose thread that could unravel everything. There has to be something. She muttered, her words more for herself than for Tyler. A paper trail, a witness, anything we can use. Tyler stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the windshield. The air in the car grew heavier, the quiet stretching between them like a taut wire ready to snap. For a moment neither of them spoke, both caught in the weight of their thoughts. Then Aaliyah's phone buzzed, her pulse quickened as she grabbed it, eyes locked on the screen as a message from Jackson appeared. It was short, but exactly what she needed to see. Backup is 15 minutes out, stay put. Relief CSED through her, but it was fleeting. Ethan was relentless, and she knew better than to think 15 minutes would be easy. Backups on the way, Aaliyah said, her voice even but sharp with urgency. We just have to sit tight until they get here. Tyler nodded, but his unease hadn't faded. Yeah, well, I hope they get here before Ethan does. Aaliyah didn't answer. She knew Tyler wasn't wrong to worry. Ethan wasn't going to let her get away that easily. To him she was a problem that needed to be erased, and he wouldn't stop until she was gone for good. The stillness of the night was shattered by the faint hum of an engine in the distance. Tyler's eyes shot to the side mirror, his jaw tightening. You hear that? He muttered. Aaliyah froze, listening intently. The sound was getting louder, her gut twisting with unease. Was it backup, or had Ethan tracked them down already? Tyler leaned forward, eyes narrowed as he peered into the darkness. I don't like this, he muttered. We're too exposed. Aaliyah's heart thudded in her chest as she squinted through the shadows, her mind racing with every possible outcome. The low rumble of the engine grew louder, setting her nerves on edge. If it was Ethan, they didn't have much time. We need to go, Tyler said, his voice tight with urgency. He twisted the key and the engine roared to life. Aaliyah's breath caught in her throat, adrenaline spiking through her system. They couldn't afford to sit still. Tyler slammed his foot on the gas, and the car lurched forward, tires screeching as they shot out of the lot and onto the narrow road. Aaliyah glanced back, her eyes darting across the dark expanse behind them, her hands curled into fists, heart pounding in her chest. Silently she prayed that backup would come soon. Her pulse raced as she scanned the road, every shadow a threat. She knew Ethan was coming, and it felt like they were running out of time. Tyler veered onto a side road, the Uneven pavement making the car jolt and bounce. They were deep in the outskirts now, surrounded by thick woods and empty. Silence. Aaliyah's gaze flicked between the rear-view mirror and the road ahead, eyes sharp for any hint of movement. You sure this is a good idea? She asked, her voice tight with nerves. We're driving into the middle of nowhere. Tyler shook his head, fingers gripping the wheel like a vice. Better than sitting still and waiting for him to find us, he said flatly. At least here we have a shot. Aaliyah wasn't convinced, but she knew they didn't have a choice. They needed to stall until Jackson's team arrived, and keeping on the move was the only option they had left. The road ahead narrowed further, cracks and potholes jolting the car with every bump. Aaliyah gripped the door, trying to steady herself as the car shuddered beneath them. Then, cutting through the night air, the low growl of another engine echoed from behind. Her heart jumped into her throat. She turned to Tyler, her eyes wide. He's here, she said, her voice strained and quiet. Tyler's face went pale, his jaw set with grim determination. Without a word he pressed the gas harder, the car picking up speed as they raced down the bumpy road. Aaliyah's pulse roared in her ears as headlights came into view behind them, growing brighter with every second. Hold on, Tyler muttered, eyes is locked on the road ahead. He yanked the wheel, steering them onto a narrow dirt path barely wide enough for one car. The headlights behind them didn't waver. They were still closing in. The road twisted and jolted every turn, making it harder to stay in control. Ethan was closing in and there was nowhere left to run. The car jerked violently as it tore down the narrow road, and Aaliyah's heart pounded in her chest. She gripped her seat silently, begging for a miracle to escape their relentless pursuer. Tyler's knuckles whitened as he clenched the steering wheel, his eyes locked on the twisting road that snaked through the dense forest. The glow from the car behind them pierced through the trees, casting jittery shadows that danced across their path. Aya felt every jolt as the car bounced on the uneven pavement, the tires barely holding onto the worn surface. They're not backing off, Tyler muttered, his voice strained with anxiety. Aya glanced at the side mirror, her pulse spiking as the trailing car loomed closer, its glaring lights cutting through the darkness like blades. She couldn't see the driver's face, but she didn't need to. Only one person would be this persistent. It's Ethan, she hissed, her gaze darting from the rear-view mirror to the road ahead. He won't stop, not until he has me. Tyler's jaw tightened as he pressed harder on the gas, the engine groaning in defiance as they surged forward. The road's sharp bends came faster now, each turn a fight to keep control. Trees crowded in on either side, their branches like reaching hands. We'll lose him, Tyler said, but it sounded more like he was trying to convince himself than her. Aaliyah wasn't so sure. Ethan had proven more than once that he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted, and right now that want was her. His obsession was suffocating, a constant weight pressing down on her. He wasn't just a dirty cop, he was a man who craved dominance, and she was the one thing standing in his way. The road ahead forked suddenly. Without warning, Tyler yanked the wheel to the left and the car skidded, tires screaming against the pavement. Aaliyah braced herself against the dashboard as the car lurched, her breath catching in her throat. For a split second the headlights behind them disappeared, only to reappear moments later, locked onto them like a predator on prey. Damn it, Tyler cursed under his breath, his face carved with frustration. He's still on us, Aaliyah's mind word running through every possible option. They couldn't keep playing this game, not on back roads like these. Ethan was too stubborn, too driven by whatever twisted obsession had taken hold of him. We can't just keep driving, Aaliyah said, urgency sharpening her voice. He'll catch up, we have to think of something. Tyler shot her a quick hard look, his jaw set like stone. Think of what we in the middle of nowhere. Aaliyah, her eyes scanned the trees lining the road, thick tangled branches stretched together like a net. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than waiting to be cornered. Her pulse was a hammer in her chest. Pull over, she said suddenly. We ditch the car, head into the woods. Tyler's brows shot up in disbelief. The woods? Are you serious? She locked eyes with him, her face hard with resolve. Yes, I'm serious. He can't follow us in There we'll lose him. For a moment Tyler didn't move, his eyes flicked to the rear view mirror where Ethan headlight surged closer, brighter, more dangerous. Then with a sharp breath he nodded. All right. He jerked the wheel, swerving the car off the road, tires screeching as they skidded to a halt. The glow of the headlights from the car behind loomed like a predator closing in. Aaliyah didn't think. She flung the passenger door open and hit the ground running, her sneakers crunching against loose gravel. Tyler followed, slamming his door as they sprinted toward the dark wall of trees ahead. The forest loomed like a fortress, dense and unforgiving, but they had no choice: disappear or be caught. The sharp squeal of brakes echoed behind them, the sound rattling in Aliyah's chest. Move, she hissed, grabbing Tyler's arm and pulling him into the tangled shadows. The overhead branches wove together, blocking out the dim glow from above, drenching everything in black. Roots jutted out from the uneven ground, underbrush clawing at their legs as they stumbled forward. Aaliyah didn't slow down. She heard it then, the clunk of a car door closing, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps on gravel. Ethan Tyler's steps were uneven behind her, his breathing sharp and quick. Panic was setting in. Keep moving, Aaliyah muttered without looking back. They knew what would happen if Ethan found them. They'd seen it before. They couldn't let it happen again. The sound of footsteps behind them grew louder, crunching through leaves and sticks. He was too close. Her pulse pounded like a drum in her ears. She darted her eyes around, looking for anywhere to hide there. Tyler rasped, pointing to a thick clump of bushes. Without a word she crouched low, yanking him down with her. The branches clawed at her skin, sharp as glass, but she didn't react. Her eyes stayed on the source of the noise. Every footstep echoed like a hammer strike, growing louder with each beat of her heart. She pressed herself deeper into the bush, muscles tense, eyes wide. They didn't move, didn't breathe. Her pulse thudded in her ears as she watched for movement. Then the sound stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. The air felt thicker, heavier. Just feet away she could hear the faint shift of boots against leaves. Her stomach knotted, her mind spinning through every possible move. If Ethan saw them, it was over. Tyler sat beside her, every part of him trembling. She gripped his arm hard, a silent warning, don't move. The seconds crawled by like hours, every sound stretching longer than it should. Then the footsteps started again, but this time they moved away. Her breath eased out slowly, her muscles still tight. Relief trickled in, but she knew better than to relax. He's leaving, Tyler whispered, barely audible. She gave a small nod, eyes still locked on the shadows ahead. Ethan wasn't the kind to quit, not until he got what he wanted. We can't stay here, she murmured, scanning the forest for their next move. We need to keep going. Tyler paused briefly, then gave a firm nod. Slowly they rose and began navigating further into the woods. Their movements quiet against the soft mossy ground. The night dragged on, each step weighed down by the invisible threat of Ethan chasing them. Aaliyah knew they couldn't keep running forever, but for now staying ahead was their only option. Their breaths were shallow, bodies on edge as they pressed deeper into the forest. The air smelled of damp earth, and the only sounds were the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. They'd managed to elude Ethan for the moment, but Aaliyah couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that he was still out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for his chance to strike. The trees seemed to press in tighter the further they went from the road. The ground was rough, littered with branches and thick underbrush that made each step a challenge. Aaliyah's legs burned with each movement, but she pushed through the pain. Stopping wasn't an option. They were still being hunted. Beside her, Tyler stumbled, his face pale in the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the tree canopy. His breaths were quick and shallow, and it was clear he was struggling. Aaliyah slowed just a bit, her eyes darting toward him with concern. You good? She whispered, her voice barely a breath. Tyler gave a sharp nod, his face grim. Yeah, I'm good, just catching my breath. She knew he was worn out, but stopping now was too risky, not with Ethan still out there closing in. We have to keep moving, she murmured, her eyes scanning the darkness ahead. We need to find somewhere to hide until we can figure out a plan. Tyler didn't argue, he nodded and kept walking, his steps sluggish and uneven. Aaliyah's mind worked overtime, As they pushed forward trying to map out their next move, they couldn't stay in the woods forever, but going back to the road was suicide. Ethan would be waiting for them, more determined than ever to catch them. Suddenly Tyler froze, his arm shooting out to grab Aaliyah. Her heart jumped into her throat and she spun toward him, eyes wide. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice sharp with urgency. He didn't answer right away. Instead said he lifted a hand and pointed ahead, his face tense with alarm. Aya squinted into the shadows, eyes darting through the darkness. At first she saw nothing, but then as her eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight, she spotted it, the shape of a structure in the distance. It was a cabin, weathered and barely visible behind a wall of trees. Its wooden frame leaned slightly, like it had been abandoned for years. The windows were empty, hollow voids of darkness, and the roof sagged like it was about to cave in. But it was shelter. Temporary, sure, but right now that was enough. "Come on," Aya whispered, tugging on Tyler's arm. "Let's check it out." They moved carefully, their steps light on the forest floor. The closer they got, the stronger the unease in Aaliyah's chest grew. It looked empty, but she knew better than to trust appearances. Ethan was still out there, and walking into a trap was the last thing they needed. Reaching the front of the cabin, Aaliyah tested the door with caution. It groaned loudly as it swung open, the sharp creak cutting through the still night air. She winced at the noise but shoved it open wider, motioning for Tyler to follow her. In the inside of the cabin was no better than the outside side. Dust blanketed every surface and thick cobwebs drooped from the corners of the ceiling. The little furniture there was looked battered and decayed, with splintered wood and cracked edges from years of neglect. The air red of milieu, and every step they took made the old floorboards groan beneath them. Aaliyah shut the door behind them, her eyes darting around, searching for anything that might be useful. There wasn't much, just a few broken down chairs and a rickety table that seemed one push away from collapse. Still, it was better than being out in the open. They had walls now, at least a small layer of protection. "We can stay here for a bit," Aaliyah said, her voice firm but uncertain. "Just until we figure out what to do next." Tyler gave a slow nod, easing himself into one of the broken chairs. With a long sigh of relief he wiped his forehead, his face slick with sweat. "Despite the chill of the night, this place gives me the creeps," Tyler muttered, his gaze flitting around the room. "But I guess it's better than being out there." Aaliyah agreed silently, but couldn't shake the sensation that something wasn't right. The cabin was too still, too unnervingly quiet. Her gut told her to stay on edge, but she didn't want to set off Ty's nerves. They were already running on fear and panic. "Wouldn't help. We'll be fine," Ah said, forcing more confidence into her tone than she actually felt. "We just need to rest for a bit, then we'll figure out the next move." Tyler nodded, though doubt lingered on his face. Aaliyah understood this whole situation felt wrong, like no matter what they did they were always a step behind. She moved toward one of the windows, slowly tugging the tattered curtain aside just enough to see outside. The forest stretched beyond a mass of dark tangled trees. She didn't spot Ethan, but that didn't mean he wasn't out there. "We have to leave soon," she muttered, more to herself than Tyler. "We can't stay here too long." Tyler glanced up at her, his eyes heavy with exhaustion but still sharp with resolve. "What's the plan? We can't just keep running forever." Aaliyah let the curtain fall back into place with a sigh. "I don't know yet, but we can't head back to the road. Ethan is waiting for us there." Tyler frowned, his brows pulling tight as he thought, what if we try to find a town? There's got to be one close by. Aaliyah shook her head. "Too risky. If Ethan catches us before we get there, it's over." Silence hung between them, thick and heavy. Both of them racked their brains for a solution, but every option seemed to lead to the same outcome: danger. The idea of running into Ethan again made Aaliyah's stomach twist. Then, out of nowhere, the sharp snap of a twig echoed from outside. Aaliyah's heart burst into her throat. She shot a frantic look at Tyler, her heart thudding in her chest. "Did you hear that?" Tyler's whisper was so faint it barely reached her ears. Aaliyah gave a quick nod, her body stiffening as she strained to catch the sound. There it was, Again slow steady footsteps echoing through the woods beyond the cabin walls. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded high. As she pressed her back flat against the rough wood, every muscle in her body coiled tight. She signaled Tyler to stay quiet, pressing a finger to her lips. His wide fearful eyes met hers, but he nodded. Fully grasping the gravity of their situation, the footsteps grew louder, each step slow, deliberate. Whoever was outside wasn't bothering to stay quiet. No, they wanted to be heard. They knew exactly where Aaliyah and Tyler were, and they were in no rush. Her mind raced, already imagining what would happen if Ethan got inside. He'd already proven he wouldn't hesitate to use force, and after all that had happened, he had nothing to lose. Aaliyah's hand drifted to her waistband where her FBI-issued sidearm rested, the weight of it grounding her in the chaos of their escape. She'd almost forgotten it was there. She didn't want to use it. That was never the first choice, but if it meant protecting herself and Tyler, she wouldn't think twice. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Every muscle in Aaliyah's body went rigid. She didn't breathe, didn't move. A crushing silence filled the air, stretching every second into an eternity. Then bang, the door exploded inward, crashing into the wall with a force so strong it rattled the entire cabin. Aaliyah's heart jolted as she and Tyler flattened themselves against the wall, hidden in the shadows. Heavy boots stomped inside, each step slow, methodical. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go, no exits, no escape. Aaliyah, Tyler's whisper was barely audible, his face pale as chalk. What do we do? She shook her head sharply, fingers tightening around her weapon grip. Stay quiet, she mouthed, eyes locked on his. Don't move. A shadowy figure lingered in the doorway, still as a statue. Aaliyah didn't need to see his face. She knew that stance, that breathing pattern. Ethan, her chest tightened, her mind running wild. While was he waiting? Was he playing with them, drawing out the fear? Come out wherever you are. Ethan voice sing-song through the cabin, thick with mockery. You can't hide forever, Agent Lawson. A chill crawled down Aaliyah's spine. He knew she was there. She could feel his eyes scanning the room, savoring every second. Slowly keeping her movements small, Aaliyah shifted toward the corner, her back never leaving the wall. Her gun was out now, gripped firmly but hidden behind her leg. Her breath stayed shallow, her focus razor sharp. Stay calm, stay sharp. Tyler's breathing turned quick and uneven. Panic. She reached out, placed a firm hand on his arm, her gaze steady on his. Not now, not here. They had to hold it together. Ethan stepped further inside, his flashlight beam cutting through the room like a blade. You thought you could run, he sneered, his voice a low bitter rasp. Thought you could just walk away after what you did? Aaliyah's thoughts spiraled, her chest tightening with confusion. What was he even talking about? What crime had she committed? All she'd done was follow the trail of her investigation, and now she was being hunted like some kind of fugitive. I know you're in here, Aaliyah. Ethan called out, his voice sharp and closing in. I can smell your fear. Why don't you make this easy and come out? You know this won't end well for you. Her fingers curled tighter around the handle of her gun, feeling the cold metal press against her skin. It wasn't much, but it gave her a sliver of control in a situation that had spun wildly beyond it. She had to stay sharp. One wrong move and it would all be over. Slowly she tilted her head just enough to peek around the edge of the wall. Ethan stood dead center in the room, his flashlight cutting through the haze of dust hanging in the air. His face was stone cold, devoid of emotion, like this was just another mundane traffic stop. Instead of a hunt for a fellow officer, her mind churned through every possible move she could. Step out, flash her FBI badge and try to reason with him, but would he even care? Ethan had already made it clear her badge meant nothing to him. No, he was enjoying this, the power, the control. He wasn't just after her, he wanted to break her. Then a soft creak echoed beside her. Tyler's foot had nudged a loose board, and though the sound was faint, it may as well have been a gunshot in the stillness of the cabin. Ethan head snapped toward the noise, eyes locking in like a predator. What was that? He barked, his Voice cutting the air like a blade. Aaliyah's pulse thundered in her ears. They'd been made. Hiding was no longer an option. No more time to plan, no room to doubt. It was now or never. She drew in a deep breath, then stepped out from the cover of the wall, her gun held low but ready. Ethan, she called out firmly, her voice steady despite the dread coursing through her veins. It's over, put it down, walk away for a second, just a second. His eyes flickered with shock, but it vanished as quickly as it came, his face hardening into something cruel. Aaliyah Lawson, he sneered, his tone oozing malice. I knew you'd show eventually. She raised her empty hand, trying to ease him down. It doesn't have to end like this, Ethan, we can talk. He let out a dry, hollow laugh as he took a slow, deliberate step forward. You think I'm in the mood to talk after everything you've done? Her brow furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about, Ethan? What did I do? His lips twisted into a bitter smile as he gripped the baton tighter. You really think you can just stroll into my town, stick your nose where it doesn't belong, and walk away like nothing happened? You think I'd let that slide? Her eyes narrowed. So that was it. It was never about a traffic stop. This was personal. Her investigation had hit too close to something he didn't want uncovered, and now he was ready to silence her for good. I was just doing my job, Aaliyah said firmly, her eyes sharp with resolve. You can't keep running from this. Sooner or later the truth will come out. Daniak's face twisted in fury, his jaw clenched so tight she thought he might snap. For a moment she thought he might actually strike her, but then he drew in a slow breath, his eyes turning cold as ice. You don't know what you're dealing with, Agent Lawan, he said in a low, dangerous tone, but you will soon enough. Before Aaliyah could respond, Ethan lunged at her, baton raised high. Her body moved on instinct, ducking as the baton cut through the air inches from her head. She spun around, her gun drawn in a flash, but before she could fire, Ethan grabbed her wrist, twisting it until her fingers went numb. The gun slipped from her grip, hitting the floor with a sharp clang. Tyler's voice rang out in panic and he rushed toward them, but Ethan moved like a predator. With one swift shove he threw Aaliyah to the ground and turned to face Tyler with a deadly glare. Aaliyah hit the ground hard, pain jolting through her body as she tried to catch her breath. The cabin's flickering lights sent jagged shadows dancing across the walls, disorienting her further as she struggled to push herself up. Tyler stood just a few feet away, his hands raised as if that would somehow shield him from Ethan, who loomed like a storm on the edge of breaking. Aaliyah's mind raced. Her gun was gone, her body ached, but she still had her wits. Training kicked in, pushing back the fear that threatened to take over. She couldn't freeze up, not now. Clenching her jaw, she rolled away from Ethan, forcing distance between them. Her heart pounded, every muscle tensed as her eyes darted around the room for anything she could use as a weapon. Ethan's gaze tracked her every move. You're a tough one, huh? All do matter, it ends here, he sneered, his eyes wild with a mix of rage and twisted amusement. Aaliyah glanced at Tyler. He was watching her, his eyes darting between her and Ethan like he was trying to calculate his next move. She could see the fear in him, but there was something else too, determination. Aaliyah knew she had seconds at most. If she waited for Ethan to make the next move, it would be too late. Her eyes locked on a heavy metal pipe lying in the corner of the cabin, not perfect, but it would do. Without hesitation she lunged for it, gripping it in both hands. Just as Ethan closed in with a quick pivot, she swung it hard, the metal connecting with a sickening thud. Ethan staggered back, his eyes wide with shock before they narrowed with rage. A pipe, that's your big plan, he spat, wiping a smear of blood from his lip. You think that's enough to stop me? His grin was full of menace, but Aaliyah saw it, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He wasn't as sure of himself as he wanted her to believe. She pressed her advantage, gripping the pipe tighter, her breath coming fast and hard. Tyler, stay back, she yelled, her voice sharp and commanding. Get out of here and find help. Her eyes stayed on Ethan, ready for whatever came next. Tyler paused for a heartbeat, clearly torn between staying or fleeing. But when he caught the fierce resolve in Aaliyah's eyes, he gave a sharp nod and bolted toward the door, vanishing into The night Aaliyah's attention locked back on Ethan, he was still reeling from the blow she delivered, but his rage only seemed to intensify with each passing second. Aaliyah knew she had to use that fury against him. If she could make him underestimate her, she might create an opening to turn the tables. As Ethan closed in, Aaliyah moved with precision and control. She swung the pipe in measured arcs, forcing him to stay back. Her training had taught her how to handle confrontations, but dealing with someone as volatile as Ethan was an entirely different challenge. "Why are you doing this, Ethan?" Aaliyah demanded, her voice firm despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "What's your endgame?" Ethan sneered, his face contorted with pure hatred. "You think you're better than me, don't you? You FBI agents think you can stroll into my town digging up things that aren't your business, acting like you're untouchable." Aaliyah saw the venom in his eyes, and it was clear now this was about more than just personal vengeance. Ethan had something to protect, and her investigation had clearly struck a nerve, but it was too late for questions. Aaliyah had to stay locked in on the threat in front of her. Ethan lunged at her again, but this time she was ready. She pivoted, dodging his charge, and swung the pipe hard, landing a solid hit on his arm. Ethan howled in pain, stumbling back as he clutched his arm. Aaliyah didn't hesitate. She charged forward, knocking the baton from his grip, sending it clattering across the floor. Her eyes darted toward it, and she moved to grab it, but Ethan wasn't finished yet. He lunged at her, driven by desperation. Just as he reached her, the distant sound of sirens broke through the night. Aaliyah's chest swelled with hope. Help was on the way. The sound grew louder, and Ethan's eyes flicked toward the door. His panic was palpable. "It's over, Ethan," Aaliyah said, her voice steady and unyielding. "The cops are coming." Ethan froze, his eyes darting between Aaliyah and the door. For a moment it seemed like he might make a run for it, but then he turned back toward her, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice sharp and threatening. "You haven't seen the last of me." Before Aaliyah could react, Ethan spun on his heel and sprinted for the back door, disappearing into the night. Aaliyah wasted no time. She grabbed the baton and did a quick scan of the cabin to make sure Tyler was safe. The sirens grew louder, and she spotted the glow of red and blue lights flashing through the windows. A rush of relief swept over her as the first squad cars screeched to a halt outside. Officers moved in with a practiced urgency, their faces set with purpose. Agent Lawson of the officers called, recognition in his voice. "Are you okay?" Aaliyah nodded, her body buzzing with exhaustion. "I'm fine," she said, steadying her breath. "But Ethan is on the run. He's armed and dangerous." The officers moved into action, spreading out to search for him. Aaliyah watched as they fanned out with precision and focus. Ethan wouldn't get far, not with this many eyes on him. Her heart was still pounding, but she allowed herself to believe it was almost over. Her mind shifted to Tyler. He was safe, but she knew the fear from that night wouldn't fade easily. Some things just leave a mark. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections full of deep values yet entertaining. See you there.